Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another YouTube video guide for a Dominating Blow Herald of Purity Guardian. Now this is a build that I've been considered to be one of the better League starter builds throughout the game ever since this really sparked up in the community many years ago. The guide I have has been requiring quite a bit of an update, so here's the update. I'll first be showing you the build I've been playing, which is a bit higher budget. However, most of the higher budget version of this is basically just oriented around the defensive aspect of the build. And obviously at the end of the video, I'll go through the details of this build in a low budget. So you can save your comments for that and watch the actual video, and you'll see the low budget at the end of the video. So we're going to show this build in a Redeemer fight, because I don't have Awakener sorted yet. And this build is going to do the map clearing. We kill the boss, and I'll go through the details of the build. However, a little small note for those of you who are interested in League starting with a build like this, you kind of have to get Circle of Guilt with the Herald of Purity mana reservation. Even for the low budget version will require this. So that is something I would recommend to keep in mind when you're using this as a League starter, because these might not be available in the first couple of days. The other approach with this is that you're kind of needing to use a Writing Jar, and for the low budget I would strongly recommend using a Scourge Claw, but a weapon like this is always preferable to a Scourge Claw for the way I'm playing the build. So I'm just going to go dive into the map, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of the build and my experience with it. Now the problem I've had is that I've played my Spectre build for too much, so I feel like some of the builds I play are kind of trash in comparison to this. And I will obviously at the end of this video go through, or after the mapping, go through the actual approach of crafting the gear I have for this build. I'll try to do that in a more of a TLDR manner, because I've noticed in my previous guides that I've been spending a lot of time explaining how to craft everything, rather than just focusing on the actual build guide. But I will do a quick TLDR on the way of crafting these things, and we're just going to go do the map. As you can see with clearing, DB is applying the mods from rare enemies when you soak them up. The Herald of Purity requires me to actually kill or have a chance on hitting a rare or unique targets to spawn the Herald of Purity, which is actually in the end the highest DPSing minions that we go with. This DPS right here is with melee splash in the gem setup, which is pretty chill. So what we do for single targets is we change over our melee our melee splash for multi-strike gems before we go into the boss fight. Boss fights kind of require a bit of a ramp up, like I mentioned. I have to hit enemies for a bit of time before I get the damage out there. As soon as I get the 5 minions, 4, 5, there I got 5 minions, but the boss was already dead. So it kind of requires a bit of a ramp up. I only had about 7 of my Dominating Blow minions, and I only had 3 ramping up to 5 as the boss died when it comes to my Herald of Purity. So when it comes to single target, it's very comfortable. That's why I prefer to use Cyclone to spawn Herald of Purity and just strictly stick to Herald of Purity. I did that first. I did encounter a lot of issues when it comes to clearing, which the DB kind of solves by itself. So that's why we opted for this. So it's a bit more ramp up for boss fights, but in general, I'm actually very happy with the build, how the build turned out. So the way DB works is that you can have X amount of sentinels of different kinds. The one you're mainly going to be looking at, and the way we're going to do the calculation, is going to be the boss-oriented approach, which means you can have 9 normal sentinels, or Herald of Purity minions. These Herald of Purity, sorry, not Herald of Purity, Dominating Blow minions. These don't have any special effects, and they're spawned from basically being able to hit an enemy, and the enemy dying shortly after will then spawn it as a sentinel of what are they actually called? They're called Sentinel of Dominance. There we go. However, you can have up to 3 magic ones, and the magic ones will actually get whatever attributes or modifiers the magic enemy that you hit that would be raised up as a magic Sentinel of Dominance for you will actually copy the stats that the enemy you killed had. Same thing with the 1 rare. So if you kill a rare that has, let's say, Soul Eater, then that monster or your minion will have Soul Eater. If it has a haste aura, it will provide an haste aura for you. So it's like a fraction of a headhunter. Not even that. It's less than a fraction of a headhunter. Because once you get that rolling, in some cases your DPS will skyrocket, but for the most part we're not even going to bother looking at that specific one. It's just a nice way, or a nice mechanic from the Dominating Blow. So that's the way it works. As you can see here on the mod list, there's a 25% chance for a normal Sentinel Dominance when you hit the unique enemy. That's how we ramp up the DB minions on single target. whereas Herald of Purity has a 20% chance to summon a Sentinel Purity when you hit a rare or unique enemy, and that's how we spawn those. And to help out clearing, we use Writhing Jar. Basically, the best way to combine the summoning to this and speed the process up is to actually use Writhing Jar as you're starting to hit enemies, because then your melee splash is, in more cases than not, going to kill the worms before your other minions will get a chance to kill them, which guarantees you to summon some extra minions. So that's basically how you do it. Just make sure that the DB actually hits something, otherwise the splash effect doesn't actually occur. So that's basically the gist of how to summon the minions and the DPS or version of it. So I'm going to go through the gear and a bit of the topics around this, how we've designed it. The generic Animate Guardian is using a high-budget Kingmaker Masculine Stitch Demon with a curse setup. Now, for more information on how that actually works, I would recommend you watch the video in the descriptions below, which is going through an in-depth guide on how Animate Guardian works, as well as some different gear setups, ranging from low-budget aura setup to high-budget Kingmaker, as well as how to apply curses with him. Since we are only applying one curse ourselves, the Guardian in a curse setup would only require to have one more curse, such as Windscreen boots, Vixen boots, gloves, and or a +1 curse chest piece. So it only requires one of these modifiers to be able to use 2 curses. He is applying a level 12 vulnerability, whilst we are cursing with a punishment in a trigger weapon for the high-budget version. And we also have Desecrate and Flesh Offering in our trigger weapon. TLDR on how I crafted this was basically get an Alva Drop Scepter with a proper item level to Fracture for the minion damage. And then I rolled the all spell skills, and then I harvest crafted the physical ones, purged off the suffixes, and then multi-crafted it. The rings in the high-budget version uses the Herald of Purity mana reservation, as well as Sentinel Purity damage. However, for low budget, you can skip that, and the cost of these rings goes down to only a couple of Chaos Orbs, making it very accessible for lower budget players. And the implicit doesn't really matter. I went for armor because I wanted to push up some defense with the high-budget version. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, most of the increasement of budget I put to this character was actually designed for pure defense. Both rings are pretty much identical. I sorted some dexterity to alleviate some pressure from that. The helmet in a high-budget version is a bone helmet. Make sure you have the Sentinel of Purity enchant. Obviously, you can use whichever other enchant, but the best one would be a bone helmet with +3 to minion gems, as well as nearby enemies take 9% increased physical damage. These are Elder mods, so the Hunter mod is wasted. This was the only way for me to get this specific base for the high budget. And obviously for high budget, you want to push out increased, gems are supported by level something minion damage. And then it's just life resistances. Now we have a lot of chaos resistance, and this is where the high budget really excels and increases in budget, because what I did was putting this character up to 90% chaos resistance, and I'll explain how I did that in a bit. So most of our defense comes from our chaos res and are mitigated through chaos resistance, as well as with flask and endurance charges sitting on close to 90%, if not 90% physical damage mitigation. The ring for high budget, life, resistances, chaos res again, with plus level of physical skills and strength skills. For low budget, you can use plus level of all phys or strength, or simply, if you can't afford it, skip that entirely. Just go for high HP with resistances and get your chaos res sorted, which is another perfect way to do it. Oiling the Ravenous Horde. The gloves for high budget is dexterity if you can squeeze it out. Redeemer glove for minion damage. I benched intelligence because I needed that. Otherwise, you can get that on your amulet. You can get it wherever else you can fit in benchcraft. And obviously, life and chaos resistance or other res if you need it. Torrent's Reclamation is, in my opinion, the best belt for pretty much any minion build in the game. Other options is obviously Darkness Enthroned with decked out jewelries, which will give you better defense straight up and also higher numerical value in terms of offense. I like the Torrents for the sake of clear speed, CDR on your dash, as well as faster attacking for your approach of spawning the minions. For low budget, Darkness Enthroned or a normal Siege of Vice are both perfect viable options. The boots are pretty straightforward as well. You want movement speed, life, and resistances, and if you go for high budget, you want to use Warlord and Influence for +1 to maximum endurance charges, as well as physical damage reduction if you really want to push that extra defense. You could use an Elder Base as well, which I have, for level of Spectre Gems, to squeeze out a third Spectre if you want to. It's not really needed. I'm using 2 Spectres personally at the moment, and I'm pretty happy with that. But there's a couple of ways where you can squeeze out a 3rd Spectre out of the build. Not needed in my opinion. For low budget, you would simply skip this entire shenanigans, skip the max endurance charge, just go life, movement speed, and resistances, and you cut the budget down to buying a pair of boots for like 2 chaos, maybe 3 if you're unlucky. High budget is using roomies. For low budget, I would recommend getting a roomies. They're not too expensive. You can get a shit roll for the low budget. For high budget, however, we do want to use a Bottle of Faith. And the shield. So for the high budget shield, this is one of the ways we're getting 90% chaos resistance. Basically, we want to have a Hunter Shaper shield with preferably an implicit life mod because we're not scaling the armor, so we want to have a high life. So the Esomite Tower shield is probably the best option for this. You want to have a high life roll, obviously. There's room for 1 resistance roll. In my case, I was already sorted on chaos rest, so I went with fire. You want to have block spell damage to make sure that you reach the 75% chance to block spell damage. And then the 2 modifiers that you Woke Orb is the +3 maximum chaos resistance, which is from Hunter. And the Shaper one has +2 to all maximum resistances, which means that that also affects your chaos rest because it doesn't specifically state elemental resistances. So this shield gives me 5+ to maximum chaos rest. That brings me from 75 up to 80%. And then obviously recover 5% of life when you block. Since we're blocking, you're block capped on everything, we're going to recover HP consistently. So that's the gear. So I'm going to move over to the Chaos Rest explanation. We are using a Glorious Vanity jewel from Sibaka. This allows a keystone to give us Divine Flesh. And Divine Flesh is by far the most overpowered defensive keystone in the entire game. I can see a lot of people in hardcore playing with this. It's just ridiculously broken. This gives us +10 to maximum Chaos Rest, which puts us from our 80% Chaos Rest up to 90% Chaos Rest thanks to our shield. And then we also make sure that all damage we take is bypassing our energy shield, which kind of makes the energy shield we have completely useless. However, 50% of all elemental damage we take will then be mitigated by our Chaos Rest. So let's say we take a hit with that 1000 cold damage. That 1000 cold damage will be mitigated by 500 to our Chaos Rest, making that we only take 10% of that 500 pool, whereas the other 500 damage will be taken on our cold rest, which in this case is up on 78% resistances, thanks to the increasement of all resistance here, as well as the Soul of Steel, which is over here for another +1. So we get 3% plus to our normal elemental resistances. The tree in general is pretty simple. When it comes to the Ascendancy, we're going for the Minion-oriented nodes, which are Radiant Crusade as well as Unwavering Crusade. This is just to increase our damage output and having the Onslaught effect. And it also gives us the Intimidate for free, so we don't need to use things like Awaken Melee Physical. We don't need to have Intimidate in other sources, because the Ascendancy is providing this for us. Bastion of Hope is clear because we are using a spell quite consistently with the Convocation, which will give us that extra chance to block spell damage. We are attacking to give us attack block. So there's a lot of ways for us to get that attack block consistently and the spell block consistently up there. And I'm not going to talk about the chance to block attack damage for 2 seconds every 5 seconds if you blocked in one of those conditional situations. We're looking at what we can reliably keep up on a consistent basis. The last 2 nodes is basically either Harmony of Purpose, Radiant Faith, or Time of Need. It's a matter of personal preference. I went with Radiant Faith because that gave me a little bit of armor, which gave me like 2% fist damage mitigation. So it's a matter of personal taste there. The tree itself, basically you skip everything, you just move out here to pick up Grave Pact, some HP. Righteous Decree is not needed till later so that you can properly sustain your Dominating Blow, which would only be used with a level 1 Clarity. And this is because when you switch your gems from Melee Splash to Multi-Strike, the mana reservation in your Herald of Purity goes up and the mana cost of your DB goes up. So keep the Clarity at level 1, spec Righteous Decree at a later point. We obviously go up through Retribution to pick up Sacrifice as well as Spiritual Command, which will give us the attack speed. And we move over to Quick Recovery as well as picking up Enduring Bond. And at the bottom side of the tree, we move over for Glancing Blows into Sanctuary as well as Tireless. This is all for block, resistances, and HP. We rush through Constitution to pick up a Glorious Vanity spot right here because this one will screw over our life node. And in my case, it gives me evasion rating, which is very sad to see. But we get our Divine Flesh in this location. And then we move further down to pick up Soul Steel, HP, as well as Call to Arms. Now, Call to Arms allows us to have Enduring Cry on our movement skill. So when we're moving, it will automatically cast the Enduring Cry, so we don't even have to think about it. So basically when we're moving between packs, we just left click right, and that will pop our Enduring Cry, which will consistently keep our endurance charges up to the maximum. On the left hand side, we are picking up Resolute Technique to make sure that our hits, because we don't really do damage with our attacks, we just make sure that we're spawning enemies by hitting. We don't want to miss anything, so in this case we're picking up Resolute Techniques. Cluster Jewels I'll take last. I did pick up Sanctum of Thought. Again, this is just because I wanted to push the defense to how defensive this character could be. So more devotion through life nodes and a jewel slot, and then we're picking up Righteous Army and Redemption, and we're skipping Spiritual Aid. Again, because we're not doing damage ourselves, we're giving that to our minions. We have a Watcher's Eye Jewel with the Clarity one to reduce non-channeling skills that minus mana cost. This helps a lot to sustain the DB. These jewels are about 20 to 30 chaos, maybe 40 if you're unlucky, depending on how popular this video turns out. But it shouldn't be a very expensive jewel to get. It's not needed, but it does help a little bit. So I decided to use it because of quality of life. For the high budget version, large cluster, we want to have as few passive skills as possible on a minion damaged large cluster. Now these jewels are baseline very expensive. Now I can add another suffix for resistances. I'm already overcapped and everything, so I haven't really bothered doing this. That the mods you're looking for in order of efficiency is Primordial Bond, and then you have to choose between Renewal and Rotten Claws, but for high budget you want to go for all three. The medium clusters are the same for low and high budget. You basically go for a damage whilst you're affected by a Herald. Medium cluster jewels to get Cult Leader and Disciples. What these do is very simple. It just increases the cooldown recovery for your Sentinels, as well as increased damage if you're affected by a Herald to the minions. And Cult Leader just gives increased damage while you're affected by a Herald. And the small cluster jewels for high budget, you kind of want to go for Fettle. But for the low budget, you kind of don't really need to go for Fettle. Just anything that gives you HP. Go for 2 or 3 passive small cluster. They're very cheap. Just settle with any type of passive node that will give you HP. When it comes to the harvest crafting, you can literally just alteration craft till you get a decent HP node. Augment, Regal, harvest craft, or resistance if you want to, and you're done. They're very, very easy to get a hold of. So besides that, that's the gear we're using on the high budget version. The mana sustaining that we're using is helping us through Tireless as well as Righteous Decree, and then that's helping the situation of the mana cost of our DBs. As you can see with DB in our mana pool, it is almost sustaining, but we're not sitting here attacking all the time as you saw in the clearing. We are rushing between a pack, we're hitting it once, maybe twice. The only time we're actually looking at sustaining it is when we are switching to using Awaken Multi-Strike, or sorry, Multi-Strike in our setup, making the mana cost 20. This is where the mana cost is really noticeable. However, Multi-Strike is preventing us from spending mana on every attack, because Multi-Strike needs to do their attacks before you spend mana. So because of this, as you can see, the mana is actually sustained on a level 1 Clarity. Now I'm using the the Clarity Watcher's Eye for this as well. Not sure how it would look without it. But this is basically how we're sustaining the approach of this high budget build. I believe that covered all the details in the high budget version, except for one thing, and that is talking about the actual defensive aspect of this build. So we have about 5.2k life in the build. We have 90% chaos resistance. It's very, very tanky. We're using an Animate Guardian. I did take the liberty of testing the tankiness of the Animate Guardian in a proper way. By bringing it into the harder content, or the content that does pose a risk of him dying. I personally would not recommend bringing this build into a T19 100% Delirium maps. It's not really designed for that, so I wouldn't really recommend that. When it comes to the Harvest though, it was fine to do this build versus tier 3 and even tier 4 seeds of both purple and yellow. However, the blue tier 4 was, some of them were fine. But the tier 4 seeds can be very rippy, and some of the tier 3 blue seeds was extremely rippy. So that could potentially kill the Animate Guardian very easily, as well as yourself. So I wouldn't recommend pushing that in map mods. However, if you do it in your hideout, it should be fine. I would be careful with the Animate Guardian with this specific setup when it comes to those seeds though. And that covers the high budget version. Obviously there will be links in the descriptions below. So I'm going to talk about the low budget now. The low budget I have designed to be a little bit more frisky when it comes to gear. This POB will obviously be in the description. I've added simple jewels with just life and minion damage when you use a minion skill recently. These jewels are very, very cheap. It's using a Scourge Claw. You can change this for any sort of melee weapon. Never use a wand with this. That has +1 to minion skills or +1 to spell skills, which will be perfectly fine because we don't really care about doing damage ourselves, so that would be a perfect opportunity to just squeeze out more damage out of the build. I added a Scourge Claw because it's a very generic weapon to use. The shield, I've stripped it down to its core, where you just want to have block spell damage, life, and resistances. Obviously, you want to push Chaos Res if you need it, because you want to get to 85% Chaos Res, since you're not using the +5 additional ones from the shield for this low budget. The helmet, like I mentioned before, you just want to get a bone helmet or another helmet. As long as it's Elder, it's fine. The enchant is the important part here, and you want to roll that, and it has to be level 86 to reach +3 level of minion gems. If you go below, then you can get a +2 minion gems, because your Herald of Purity will be in this helmet. Life resistances, very easily in the current league to craft yourself. Chest piece, very generic with life resistances and chaos res, whereas the high budget chest piece is basically the exact same thing, but also armor and also the hunter mod that grants physical damage taken from his as chaos in case I didn't have 90% fist damage mitigation. 15% of the damage I take would then be taken on my 90% chaos res. For the low budget version, you don't have to think about that. Just get whatever chest piece you feel like with life and resistances, preferably with armor for mitigating damage. Gloves in low budget, I didn't actually update this, I'll do that before. So when it comes to the gloves, you can basically skip the minion damage completely. You don't have to think about it and just go for HP and resistances, and you'll be fine with that. So it will look like this. Dexterity is preferable if you can get that on the gloves, obviously. They don't have to be Redeemer influenced, so we can skip that as well, just to make it look good in the POB. Boots, same thing there. Like I mentioned before, we take away the influences completely, and you just settle with not having the maximum endurance charge. You settle with not having the extra physical damage mitigation, and the only thing left is basically just life and resistances that you can use on the boots. Amulet, I've stripped it down. It's only life, resistances, benchcraft, and an oiled ravenous horde. You can find these jewels, or you can just buy them for a chaos or two. The Circle of Guilt, like I mentioned, I've taken the physical damage reduction. I just took whatever extra self modifier, but the important one is the Herald of Purity reduced mana reservation. I've also taken away the catalyzing to increase the efficiency of the reduced mana reservation in the low budget version to make it as low as possible. Darkness of Throne is a 1 Alch or 1 Chaos belt with the similar jewels I showed you earlier, with just life and extra minion damage to make this build low budget. Then a simple Rumi's Concoction. The important node here is not, or mod is not the block attack, it's the block spells. Try to find something with a good roll there. Writing Jar, and in the low budget version you then have room for a Staunching Flask, whereas in the high budget version, due to using Bottle of Faith, you're kind of forced to pick up a Corrupted Blood. Cannot be inflicted on your jewel, which is rather expensive. Other than that, we're going to talk about the cluster jewels for low budgets. Now, I've taken a 11 or 12 passive large cluster jewel, and I've only taken Primordial Bond and Renewal. I found this very cheaply for 70 chaos on the market, so I'm going to show you the prices of these things. This right here is a 12 passive. This is the shittiest baseline cluster jewel that you could craft yourself. They go for 1 chaos with the proper item level 68 to hit the mods you want. They start on 1 chaos, and as you can see, they go quickly down to 2 and 3, maybe 4 chaos. So just to overkill this entire topic, let's say that they're going to be 5 chaos for you. Very, very cheap, since you only need 1. The other jewel is obviously, if you want to purchase it and not craft it, Primordial Bond is the most crucial modifier. So I did a search with Primordial Bond and one of the Renewal or Rotten Claws, and as you can see, if you only want to get one of them, it will be 70 chaos, 75 C, 80 chaos, and then down to 80. So they're not very expensive, but obviously for a low budget build, I'd say 80 chaos for an item is a bit tight to call it low budget at that point. So if you want to craft it yourself, you can do that and get one of the mods by just alteration crafting it, or you can buy something with only one of the modifiers. And then medium cluster jewels, very simple here. The search I did here was Cult Leader and Disciples, only having one of them. Then the jewel would cost you 1 chaos, maybe 2 if you're unlucky. So that's stupidly cheap as well. However, if you want to have both of them, A full-blown version of it would be about 60-65C, I'd say. 60 to 70 chaos for a proper one, which would obviously need 2 of. So that would be a nice way for you to see, to purchase a cheap one and then have a pretty direct explanation and goal for what you want to purchase to upgrade the build from low to high. And that's it. The small clusters, like I mentioned, for a low budget, get a 3 passive, alteration craft it, or just buy a 2 passive and alteration craft it till you hit a decent life roll and keep that. That's fine. Not a problem at all. So that's the build guide. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll be updating the forum thread for this guide as well in the coming days. And hit the like button for more content, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this build. Until next time, boys. Stay safe and keep rocking.